Well, good afternoon. Here we are, start of a new week. Hope everybody had a great Father's Day weekend. And, we're kind of finding our new norm now. We're settled into this thing that is COVID, and we're embracing it, and we're embracing the challenges that come with it. And at the same time, we're embracing the opportunities. We're starting to see there's a lot of new areas emerging, and as we're doing that, we've gotten a lot of requests over the past few weeks to expand, to change the conversations around different market segment, different areas. Well, that's what today is about. The location sound mixer. One of the neat things I'm really looking forward to in today's topic is how a lot of what we think really is some magic. Some of it is the science and the art of location sound. But folks, if you're in the live event space, this is an episode you're going to want to go back and watch later, because there's a lot of great transferable ideas. And with the idea of virtual meetings, the remote meeting, all these platforms, a lot of the principles you're going to hear discussed, the techniques, the technology, equally apply to what we're doing in live events. Today's guests, I'd like to welcome back Karl from Lectrosonics. Thanks. And we got a couple new faces, John Tatooles from Sound Devices. Thanks for joining us. And Chris Howland, was reading through Chris's IMDb, and I like those shows, and I love the work you're doing and the team that you're a part of, and so many different neat and really exciting both films and television. So Pete, good morning, afternoon.
Good morning.
Here we are
back after Father's Day weekend.
Yeah, hopefully you had a good one.
Definitely, a Zoom Father's Day I had.
Zoom fathers.
Exactly. So this is going to be really exciting for me, because as I was mentioning to John, the TV and live event RF and intercom is almost a different world than film and video production. Like they use different equipment, they talk different ways, they're different sizes. It's not unusual to do a 100 wireless mic show and for a live event, and it's probably typical to only do 16, 17, 20 frequencies on a film shoot. But this is going to be really exciting. I'm eager to look at it. If you want to ask any questions, there's a little question window on your GoToWebinar control panel where you can type them in, questions or comments or whatever. Try to make the questions as complete as possible, because we probably won't get to them all right away. And some of them, in fact, maybe won't be answered until after the show, we'll send this list off to all of the members, and they can contact you all directly. I do want to say that we've started having a patron and a PayPal abilities in our website to help fund this project. And if you contribute $25 or more, we'll send you this lovely little spray bottle, which has Chanel number 5 in it, which kills COVID virus.
Or sanitizer.
Or sanitizer, exactly.
Right. And by I mean it is sanitizer. So I'm the one who looks out for the legal disclaimers on the show, and Pete makes the fun, outrageous statements, and it really makes a good team, and we enjoy it.
There we go. So Karl, why don't you just take it over?
Sure. Well, just as a kind of introduction, the role of TV, of wireless and these mixers and the audio equipment and TV and phone production, like you mentioned, Pete, is different, although the gear is related and comes from the same branches. I mean, you've got a mixer, you've got recorders like you do in the studio, and you've got wireless mics like you would in a live event. But the main difference is that this stuff's got to be portable. It's generally 12-volt powered, oftentimes powered off a battery. The transmitters need to be very much hideable. There's a lot more form factors involved to kind of fit the little specialized niches that we have in our business. And you know, it's got a long history dating back to, I don't know, as soon as there was talkies, there was sound for picture, and a lot of technological innovations have happened to make that happen. In fact, that's why they've got Academy Awards and Emmys for this category, for sound mixing, and even for the technology itself. So it's been exciting. It's been the part of the business I've been in for the last 15 years. Before that, I was doing much more on the live event and recording side. I came up as a musician, and then a recording engineer, then a live sound engineer. Now I'm in sound for picture business. So I've kind of made the evolution, if you will. And we're glad to have Chris Howland with us. I mean, he's one of the top mixers out there doing some great work, and he's in his garage, so he's going to be showing you some of his actual gear. And of course, John and I have known each other for many years and done events together like the Sound Summit and worked together on a number of projects. So I'm really pleased to be here and to talk about this stuff. I do have some pictures to share, but you know, I'd like to hand the baton to John. Give us a little bit of a background on the evolution of mixers for this business.
Sure.
That's always been fascinating to me, and I'm not in that business, but I love hearing about it.
Well, you know, the classic feature film mixer was this enormous, large device, and it required a department within the studio to manage all this gear. And you know, this was in a day where we needed massive amounts of light, and film was a precious resource, and tape was a precious resource, and the mixing consoles and the power requirements were enormous. And now we're at a point where we continue to increase the number of channels. We continue to increase the portability of our devices so that you've got portable mixing consoles that are as powerful as you know, digital desks that are all DC powerable, able to be put on a cart or in a bag. And so from an evolutionary standpoint, you know, the transition to all digital routing was a significant change. From the recording side, transitioning from wire to tape, and then tape to digital tape, and then
Right.
tape to file became kind of this progression. And now we're all in a file-based world. You know, right over my shoulder, I have an old Nagra, which is an analog tape machine, which, you know, is still, you know, the quintessential device for a production sound mixer. It's interesting to see that there's a whole generation of our production mixers that have never experienced tape, whether it's analog or digital, and it's all been file. But with that is essentially limitless amounts of recording time. You know, with the wireless capability we've had, that's reliable on the set, in adverse conditions on the street. You know, there's a difference between putting a production in place that's in the studio and doing 20 tracks or 20 channels of wireless. It's very different than being on the streets of New York or LA and doing 20 channels of wireless. And hopefully Chris and Karl will talk a little bit more about that. But you know, we're now at the point in production where we have all a parity of tools that you would typically have in a studio. So we have enough tracks, we have the mixer and routing and wireless capabilities to be able to do this in either on a location or on the set. It's an incredible place to be right now with the capabilities that we have.
The tools are just incredible. And I was thinking back to when I was in the studio business and recording, and it seemed to me that the transition to digital recording, which was first to digital tape, was in the late 80s into the early 90s, and then was really in full swing by the mid 90s. But as far as I remember, it was a little later for film. In fact, one story I remember was as a musician going to being asked to be kind of an extra, if you will, playing in place while they did camera cues and rehearsed the camera moves. And I noticed the recording engineer there, and I was into sound. So I asked him, is that a digital recorder? This must have been 1986 or so. And boy, he was very offended by that. He had a Nagra and some Sheps mics, and he was sort of taken aback by, you know, this kid asking about digital. And so still analog, at least to me, by the mid to late 80s, and I don't know when the transition happened.
Well, you know, analog is still the most important piece of the chain, because that microphone and the decisions that a production mixer is going to make of where a microphone is located, what the microphone type is, you know, decisions on that, it is all about the microphone, whether it's the wireless link that's
capturing
capable
it
of bringing
at the source,
bringing that microphone subject to microphone distance, you know, or be able to position a boom microphone just in the right spot. You know, it is again, all the things we do in terms of mixing, number of tracks and wireless links, it's all about the microphone. So that's still the most important piece of the entire production.
Now, Chris, you mentioned, I mean, I know you, so I know you were a musician before you got into doing mixing. Tell me about that transition, and what was the gear like when you got started?
Yeah, I started, in the early 90s recording music. I was a drummer in a band, and I was the one person in the room that could keep the mic from squealing. So somehow the mixer always found its way next to me at the drum set. And the first 10 years of my kind of out of high school existence was playing and touring, producing music, recording, just all manner of stuff, based out of Houston, Texas. And we had a great time with it. The transition happened for me once file sharing started really becoming a thing. Napster. It became clear that the mid-level range artists that I played with were reliant on physical product sales, CDs and merch to pay for their tours, and that the bottom was falling out of that as you couldn't sell a $20 piece of plastic anymore. They had to rethink their entire thing, and I was not high up enough the food chain to work with bigger artists. So I started looking around for other things to do, and that's when Sound for Film came up. I moved to LA. Ironically, did not play music anymore, but that's when I started doing live sound as a transition here in LA from 2000 to 2005, and I worked at places like the Troubadour, the Mint. I was the Thursday, Friday, Saturday guy at the Mint for over a year, which is a place down on Pico. It's a really amazing little room. And then places like the Temple Bar, rest in peace. That was a great place in Santa Monica. Zanzibar. They actually own
a lot of these places are having a tough time now, for sure.
Yeah. So they, but that's where I started in those working nights there allowed me to work days as a PA and transition into film work. And it's funny. I just had somebody ask me a couple of days ago. Somebody came to me and said, I'm from the live sound side. We're not doing anything. What are the similarities between what you're doing in production sound to what I do in live sound? And so I just typed up a little paragraph that I sent to him, and I saved it. So I figured I would share that with you.
That's great.
These are my opinions, but I told him, I said, there are many parallels from live sound to working on a film set. The biggest being the collaborative effort that leads up to the curtain or when the start of the show.
Right.
Only in film, we call it takes. In each camera setup, we're all working to where that comes together. As an audio engineer, you're still using your skills in mic placement, proper gain staging, and you have to adjust your plan as things change constantly. I would say the big difference is that on a film set, there's a bigger need for diplomacy, because unlike live concerts and where the sound of the show and the presentation trump all, everyone on a movie shoot is there to shoot a movie and not necessarily there to record quality sound. They don't necessarily see the connection. So your diplomacy skills have to come out. As a sound person on set, you're often put in a position of advising your clients and lobbying your colleagues from other departments: camera, grip, electric, props, costumes. All of them can have an effect on what you're recording. So you want them to help you in controlling the environment. And all these people don't have to help you. You just have to use your diplomacy skills and lobby and do favors for them, so they'll do favors for you. And so I wrapped it up. I said they can blow you off at any time. So there's a delicacy there that doesn't exist in live sound. And that was my answer to him. But there are a lot of parallels between the two worlds. Your basic skill set on mic placement, gain staging. Sure, we use less microphones and generally less RF channels, but our situations are changed because we're not in fixed locations almost ever. We are thrown out into location shooting, different places, mountaintops, and it's a roll of the dice every time we show up. Even if we were lucky enough to get there for a tech scout, I can look at RF scans and see if there's anything crazy. On the day you get there with the entire company and the very expensive cast ready to shoot a movie, things could have changed. So you're still scanning the area. You're waiting for something to come out of the woodwork and force you to change your game plan. So those are those are the different.
Something that you said made me think about studio recording, and it sounds like that's kind of the place where these two worlds might overlap more. the idea when I was working in studios, it was like very much about diplomacy. You've got the client, you might have the producer, you might have the studio owner. I was a second engineer in most cases. And man, just trying to like manage all the different things that were coming at you and the curveballs, and that's what it sounds like, except that in a studio, you're in such a controlled environment. It's like the rest of the world disappears. You don't know if it's day or night. You don't know what day it is anymore after a while. And with location sound, I mean, you're out there, like you said, on the street. You definitely know if it's day or night, and you know if you're in the path of the airport, the incoming flights. And leaf blowers are your worst nightmare, which in a studio you can't hear that at all.
Yeah, it's just one of those things where you have to really, in order to help gauge those sensibilities, you have to really be in the place of your story, telling your story. If you know you're in an urban setting and you're going to hear a little bit of humanity outside the window, it's fine. You're listening for those things that take you out of the story, and that's where you're. And it could be a leaf blower, it could be a refrigerator humming in the kitchen, it could be any number of things. So that's but everything is against the story that we're telling, the shot that we're shooting today, and day 7 of a 50-day schedule. And you're thinking about where you are in the story arc, where the characters are in that story arc, because you're basically shooting a tiny piece of a large mosaic. And from a sound perspective, you not only want to capture that performance, but you want to make sure that you mix, because as a mixer, I'm executing a live mix of all these elements that I put out there. And I'm executing a live mix, and my goal is to keep the viewer of the movie engaged in that story and not think about, not ever lose that connection.
Also, you mentioned about mic placement, and I know you've done some work with Mark Ulano, who's worked with Quentin Tarantino. And I remember reading a story about Hateful Eight where, he really was careful about choosing particular lav mics for particular actors. And if I remember one detail, I think he used the Cause 11 for Kurt Russell because it's got that little bit of brightness on the top, and it adds to that raspiness, and it adds to that kind of storytelling. That was fascinating to me. I mean, as a musician, you're always thinking, oh, this is a good mic for the viola, or this is a good mic for glockenspiel or snare drum or whatever it might be. And it's like, it's no different. It's just you're working with voices primarily.
Yeah.
I mean, unless you're doing the scoring part.
For sure. I mean, you're always pairing microphones with performances, and
all right. One thing I wanted to do is show one. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't realize.
Sorry. No, we got a little jumpy here. Yeah, you're always pairing microphones with performances, and not only how the texture of the voice, but you're also talking about the delivery. I mean, I've worked comedies with Ken Jeong where I love him to death, but he can get loud. And Ken Jeong is not somebody that you want to say, hey, can you tone it down a little bit? No, you don't do that with Ken Jeong. So I learned to use red band lavs on him for the reduced decibel level, because I know he's gonna peak, and I want to be in the right spot for that performance.
I think generally that, I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, having worked with music like you have and doing this as well, the dynamic range is more of a challenge doing this than it is for music. Would you agree?
I would, absolutely, because there's some of the performances we're capturing. Let's say they're whispers that go to screams. These are tracks. It might be one track, but it has to stand alone. And when I've recorded music, I mean, I've recorded shaker tracks here on a 57 in my garage, and they'll sound fine because it's going to be laid into a bed of a big thing. Fine. Yeah. These are, but often what we're capturing is extremely high dynamic range, and it's also has to stand on its own. There's sometimes you can never guarantee what the sound design is going to be like around your tracks once the thing is mixed and released. So you're always
that's a great point, because it is about capturing the complete performance and getting that complete dynamic range from that whisper to the scream, because the resulting dialogue hopefully won't end up being 80 dB of dynamic range, because the listener listening in their home or listening on headphones while they're on a train or whatever it might be is not going to be able to discern more than about 15 dB of dynamic range. So the dialogue ends up being a fairly narrow dynamic range, but the performance very well might be all over the place, depending on their subject to microphone distance, how much they're outputting to the output level of the microphone, the input gain of the microphone that it's going, the input stage that it's going into. So there's all these other factors. And, I think from the production mixer, make sure you capture that entire dynamic range. That's a big piece of it, but fully well knowing that, what's going to result on the screen probably won't be that dynamic range.
Right, and
That's
that's kind of, I'm sorry, and just to tag onto that, there's and we certainly hope and appreciate when the dialogue that we captured is nipped and tucked and put into that dynamic range for the end user. But it's also worth pointing out that we're mixing not just for the end product of the movie, we're also mixing for everybody who's going to have to digest this performance down the production line. So the picture editor, usually it's the assistant. The first person to hear it is the director on set in their cans, and then it gets married to picture through the assistant editor, and then it goes to the picture editor, and often they start assembly cutting things while we're still shooting the movie. So that original production mix that we make is what they gauge all of their performances by. That's what they gauge the first edit by, and that's even what executives sitting in the at the studios are gauging their actor performances by.
Sure.
So this mix that we create plays a lot of parts. Helps a lot of other processes throughout the workflow before it even gets to the final audio post. So
And consistency is a huge issue then. I mean, over time, which I don't think it is for any other type of, recording like this. Even recording a record, yeah, of course, the singer should sound consistent in the song, but it can be different on different parts of the album. Where you, from start to finish of the story, like you said, follow the story arc. It's always very impressive to me when I'm watching a movie and it's a super quiet part where you might hear a tiny little bit of background noise, like literally crickets or something, and then there's nothing but voice and a dialogue, and the entire story is that dialogue at that point. And that's when your work really shines, I think, you and your colleagues.
Yep, it's a fun process to go through. But there is a lot of negotiation that has to happen on the set. They're shooting multiple cameras. Sometimes they have a wider shot that's covering a geographic movement and where you are, and then they have a B camera that's actually capturing a medium or a tight performance of the actor. So there's times you're handed those challenges where you can't get anywhere near the actor with a big mic, so you have to use the small mics. And yeah.
Seems more
Chris,
and more,
speaking of
multi-camera
challenges,
shoots.
Yeah, I mean, I know that the DGA and 695 have been part of some recommendations on kind of the current environment and terms of production. Do you see the number of cameras, the coverage, things changing the way shooting is going to go, has been done with, so much coverage? You think there's going to be maybe not necessarily moving back to single camera world, but, more towards, simpler production?
I think we're going to see productions having to change with the comfort level of their talent. And that will have, wherever the talent is and how things are being run, that's going to be where the ripple effect starts, and we're all going to have to act and react to that. That may result in less cameras per shoot. That may result in less actors in any given scene. You may not see these huge dinner party scenes for a while with 10 people around a table. You may not see actors wading through a sea of extras in a nightclub for a while. There's certain types of shots that aren't going to happen anymore. But I say from production to production, a lot of that is just gonna come down from above. It's going to be us keeping talent comfortable and keeping them safe, and as well as keeping the crew safe. So I think we're going to see all the tools come out. There might be some cases where we're shooting something that's fairly maybe disjointed. You got one angle from here, one angle from here, where there might be more camera angles involved that are further away. But on the intimate scenes where we all have to be in one room, I mean, there's definitely going to be less people. So you might still end up with two cameras. You might end up with a lock-off abandoned camera there, and then a second one moving. So I think all the tools will come out,
Sure.
But a lot of that will be dictated by the comfort level of the talent.
Chris, are you starting to see scripts change as a result of the situation that we're in?
I am not on any new shows yet, so I haven't really worked on any post-COVID stuff. My only one job was so far was with ESPN shooting stuff for the ESPYs. So that was a one-day job. But But that was definitely, that would have been one of those 30 or 40 people on set back in the day. Instead, it was only 8 or 10 of us there, and the entire gallery was back in New York watching on a video conference. So it became a much simpler job for us. But I do suspect that scripts will change. I do suspect that the stories will be changed so that they can be shot in a way where there's just less people and resources needed.
Yeah, I mean, I think of the shot with like those going into a club, walking through all the people in a club. Of course, you won't be able to do a shot like that now in the foreseeable future, but they'll maybe simulate it in some way or have them standing above I don't know. It's hard to imagine some of the things you see commonly on any episodics or any movie today, and it's just this weird feeling of like, wow, yeah, we used to go places and hang out with people,
Yep. I imagine now seeing if 2 characters have to be in a nightclub talking, they'll be standing up on a railing, looking down at the floor, but we'll be looking up at them as the lights bounce off of them and we hear loud music in the background. You're going to sell more things with sound and lighting and set dressing and things like that. I think there'll be a lot more implied things instead of us actually seeing them.
I wonder about the role of stock footage and green screens, maybe, playing a little bit of a role occasionally where they wouldn't have before,
For sure, projection, rear projection images, things like that. Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about certain shows using this volume of screens that they have, a 360 volume where you can walk in and there's screens on 360 degrees around you and over your head, and the camera can now shoot in that area, and you could put anything you want to on the screen, and that tells you where you are. And then they put practical set dressing behind the actors to really sell it and
to weave it.
You can be anywhere, but instead you're on a very echoey stage.
I've got a couple of questions relating to that. You think CGI will be even more important?
I think there's certain stories that already lend themselves to a lot of visual effects. So there's certainly tricks they have in the tool bag that can help us. Painting out booms is one thing. So you can maintain social distancing and be able to still get close to the actor in wide shots. It's hard to do that on shows that don't already have a sound effects budget because there's certain things they'll do to help tell their story, but they won't necessarily bring it in just for sound coverage. So
I think they meant CGI in putting in a computer generated dance crowd.
Yeah, absolutely. I could see that happening for sure.
Yeah. I mean, like how some shows have spots put on actors to then they fill it all in with a picture of a dog's head or something, but
motion capture. Yeah.
Exactly. Early on, when we first started, you were talking about levels and stuff like that, and Jay Patterson notes musical instruments aren't subject to unexpected increases in adrenaline, and I would like to disagree with him. I've
got to disagree with that too.
Go from very soft to extremely loud, depending on when they played.
It's usually
an excitement level in performance.
Yeah, and it's usually during the rehearsal where it's much lower level, and then all of a sudden during the performance they're going to start cranking it out. And whether it's
like
an actor,
rehearsal in an actor, they whisper during the rehearsal and then they act later.
We did a user story just recently with Brendan Beebe and talking about some of his work on American Horror Story, and he mentioned I guess Lady Gaga was on the show for a couple seasons. And he asked her at one point, what's coming up in this scene? Are you going to whisper? Are you going to scream? And she said, slyly, you never know. So I mean, there's that level of unpredictability. But I think, musicians performing, a really hot performance is going to be pushing the envelope all the way around. And that's what makes it exciting. And in the studio, it's the same thing. We used to joke about it. There's like the 6 dB rule. You do a sound check and you get all your levels and you go, okay, then now give ourselves 6 dB of headroom. Because they're going to push it in the performance when they're really laying tape.
Yeah, one thing from a technological standpoint I do want to bring up as far as that dynamic range is, in our little mix pre's, which are our little compact mixers, we've got a mix pre 3, 6, and 10. There's a topology that we did for the preamplifiers where these are using multiple A to D converters, and they're taking the signal, splitting it into the multiple A to D converters, and then we write a 32-bit float file that essentially has, the measured dynamic range is 142 dB. So that's the entire coverage of a microphone, whether it's a dynamic or a high performance low noise condenser. So essentially what that allows somebody to do, and it's more particular in a bag drop application. A bag drop is a term used where, let's say the actors are going to be driving around in a car. You may set up the car setup in the microphones. You may not necessarily know their levels. They might be talking very quiet when you first set it up, and then they're screaming once they're on the highway. And having a 32-bit float ability with a preamplifier that can take that full dynamic range allows you to essentially record the entire thing without the gain level really being a piece of that. So it's gain invariant, and you can make those gain decisions in post-production. So that's a tool that we see for some applications where 32-bit float is a big benefit. Now it really only benefits in those environments with a hardline microphone. So wireless systems to date don't necessarily communicate over 32-bit float. So they're going to be in a 24-bit integer digital interconnection over AES and such. But for a hardline microphone, plugged into a little mix pre in an environment where you have no idea where the levels are, in that situation, you really don't have to be concerned because you can make those decisions later in post.
So if we're going to get into gear, and I think we will now, thanks John for that segue. What I'd like to do is show some pictures of, let's say, typical location sound rigs, going from, let's say, big to small, because there's a good variety. And you mentioned a bag drop, so I want to kind of show what a bag is for those that don't know this kind of terminology. So let me get into that, and you guys are of course welcome to comment on these things as I go along. But let me get into, okay, so there we go. This first picture is one of my favorites recently because it's kind of movie making in a nutshell. There you go. There's your major star, and then the boom mic in a softy wind jammer over there. This is by the way, Chris Monroe did this production. He's out of the UK, and then you see the cameras and something related to lighting in the very back of the alley there. But one of the things about this modern production like this on location is how mobile it is. These guys can run around. Everything is wireless, from the camera monitoring to the wireless mic used on the boom pole. And then it's probably either a cart or a bag going on here. And I just find that really interesting. So the other thing about it is that, for live sound, you might have two main transmitter types. You've got your handheld type and your belt pack type that might be hooked up to like a head-worn microphone or something like that, or maybe a lav. In the case of Broadway, they hide the lav mics up in the. But here in our business, you've got plug-on type transmitters and different kinds of belt packs to do different things, all the way down to tiny. Some of them have a recording feature. Some are waterproof. Some offer different power settings. And most of the manufacturers doing this stuff for our business have some variety of these products to be used in the different ways. But I wanted to get into what production systems look like. So this is Edie Moskowitz, who's one of the main guys in our business, who's done TV shows like Criminal Minds and Pushing Daisies, Anger Management, and one of my favorite shows from years ago, Numbers, about the FBI and using number theory and game theory to solve problems. And some movies like Just Getting Started with Morgan Freeman and Polaroid, just out last year. So what we see there is his CART system. And it looks like he's got about 12 channels of wireless. And then he's got, is that a Yamaha mixer in this case?
Yeah, that's an 01V. And then
right.
there's two 970s, which are, he's probably connected over Dante. That would be my guess.
Yep. Yeah, those are your sound, or I guess they were called video devices.
No, 970 is an audio only recorder, so that's a
audio only.
product.
Okay,
Yep.
Great, fantastic. So, and this cart then is in a rolling case with lids that can be buttoned up, put on a van, and rolled to the next location, unloaded and opened up, and then drawers pulled out and expanded. And when we get to the end of this, Chris, I want you to show your rig, because everybody's rig is different. Every mixer owns their own equipment. It's not the house system. Some studios own equipment, but most of these mixers that do these bigger shows and movies and so on have their own gear. and it's very customized to their way of working.
Yeah, it's very nice. I always equate it to a chef cooking in their own kitchen because
Yep.
they know where all the gear is, they know the gain staging, they know how it's all set up. That changes when you get into bigger reality shows. Those kind of things typically will rent gear from a rental house and you as a department come in and stage it, set it up. But on narrative stuff like TV shows and feature films, yeah, we own our own gear. It's rented to production on a daily basis. And it's a really, really great way to just have everything dialed in. You know where all of your little tricks are. And
It does
yeah.
change a little bit too outside the US. So in some places outside the US, there are facilities houses that are going to, staff or provide gear to staff and such. So it's definitely more a US construct to have the gear be owned by the production mixer.
I've got a
And-
question from
Yeah.
Kenneth Goodwin about this. How would you suggest to make the switch from live sound to being location sound mixer? It is daunting. It seems like there's a large financial burden to make the switch. A live sound person gets started with multi-tool, flashlight, and a wrench. The bag and boom kits I see start around 20K or 30K.
Yeah, it's true.
I-
Although I would say there's ways to get in and apprentice as a utility and things like that. But Chris, I mean, you might have the most insight on that.
My first movie I did with a PST M4 mixer, plug with one microphone plugged into it, and I plugged that mixer straight into a camera. It was a low-budget, non-union feature film called Holiday Inn. Thank you. I'll never forget that the rest of my life. It was a 12-day shoot, and I made enough on that shoot because I negotiated a decent deal for myself. I made enough on that shoot to not only pay for that gear, but to also start adding on for the next job, whatever the next job was. I would say now, and this was 2005, 2006. I would say now more than ever, there is so much really good gear out there that is technology has come to a point now where things are so cheap that you can get started with a mixed pre 3 and a couple electro units, and you're off and running with a single boom. You're off and running for less than 10 grand. And in some cases, if you're gonna start out doing student films, you could be out the door starting for $1,200-$1,300 with a boom and a mix pre. And if production decides they want lav mics or they want this and that, they can rent it at that level.
Right.
If they're going to pay
Right.
you a student level rate, and this is something that even it's student film or whatever, it does not cost that much. The 20 or 30 grand is an entry point. It is not necessary anymore.
And also the question is, which is first, the gear or the gig?
Right.
If you've got the gig, you can always source the gear, whether it's rental, whether it's, there's this kind of secondary peer rental that we see quite a bit, where you've got kind of an affiliate group and you're borrowing something from somebody you know or you've worked with before. So, the gig is more important than the gear when you're first starting out. But then at some point, being the master of your craft and being the master of all your devices, so that when you're showing up on set, all the gain structure, everything's set up. You're not the obstacle in getting things moving along on set. That's going to be super important.
And it's important to make friends too and know who everybody is in your local area and what kind of work they're doing. And we'll get maybe more into set etiquette later, but I mean, understanding the hierarchy and the rules of unwritten or written, that kind of thing, is very important in this business. It's really a small industry when it comes right down to it, and most of the players know each other. And it's never good to just go and start taking business away from the local players by undercutting their price and bringing in lower than pro level gear and that kind of thing, because you'll get burned pretty quickly doing that. Again, you mentioned like student level pictures and indie films and whatever, totally fine. It's a great way to get started and hone your craft, but just be aware that there's a hierarchy in place in any given local area, and it's good to respect that.
I think that's true in every aspect of the entertainment and film industry. Is your relationship with the people you're working with way more important than what equipment you own or buy, and the fact that you do the job well. I've got a question about a technical question, two of them actually. Back to you were talking about the noise during your shooting, Chris. does the film audio person take care of the audio continuity, or will the script person, i.e. leaving the noise of the refrigerator in and making sure you have it the next time you shoot in the kitchen?
The continuity person is a great help on certain things, but those when it comes to noise issues, that's something we rely on ourselves to do.
So you would make a note of that, just make sure you have that same kind of noise in there if you couldn't get rid of it, or if it was part of the story.
Well, there's two schools of thought on that, and I usually try to connect with my audio post teams if I can to see where they are on it. I've had audio post teams that say leave it in if it's there and it's not too bad, just leave it in. When you, especially if we're turning around on the coverage and we no longer see whatever's making noise, they'll say leave it going because that'll make it easier for us. And then I've had other schools of thought where they say no, kill it as soon as you don't see it, get out of it, because the first thing we're going to try and do is get out of it. So I want to help the audio post team do whatever they want to do. I float the information out there saying this is what's going on, and you know, we work together on that. It's collaborative at that point. And I'll do
and one thing. Oh,
yeah, since they're the ones who are the custodians of taking my work and helping to tell the story with it, I want to set them up to do what they want to do. So yeah, that's how it works.
And the second
the concept of
go ahead.
The concept of a stem is important because the dialogue is its own stem, and having that in isolation, especially for, you know, a dramatic episodic that may be translated, that dialogue stem is going to be stripped, and then there's other elements of the mix that will still be there. So, you know, the walla and the sound effects and the background music, depending if they have a license for wherever they're playing it, you know, all those things are in consideration. So if you can extract that dialogue cleanly, that's always going to be, you know, kind of the first place you think about it. And then if you've got a compromise, then you're going to start to negotiate with post.
Yeah, there's been low budget movies I've worked on that are very dependent on foreign deliveries, on foreign sales. So they want to dub in other languages, do that kind of stuff. So this all has to do with that decision and setting them up for that foreign distribution.
Technically, how are they doing the wireless sync for things like timecode between the cameras and the audio recorder, or is it just jam synced?
Typically it's jam synced. There are a couple of new systems out there, Betso, and I forget the other, Ambient, and they're coming up with systems now where timecode can be generated from a central source to the slates and to the sync boxes on camera, and everything just runs in real time. I still kind of run the older system where, or I would say current, I don't know, where I jam sync. So my sound device is 688 or whatever my primary recorder is going to generate timecode, and then I will jam sync camera sync boxes, and then they go to camera. I jam sync the slates, and they go to the ACs.
And you do that right before each take, or in the morning?
No, we do that. When I first started, we did it in the morning, and then we did it after lunch. But now those timecode sources are so solid, we don't even jam after lunch anymore if we don't need to, if there's not a pressing need to. So yeah.
Where would you know? Do you check it, or how do you make sure that it's okay?
Yes. I have a picture at my cart, and I can see all the cameras running, and I can see the time code on each camera. So as we're shooting every take, I can look at my time code, look at the time code. There might be a few frames of drift just because of the video image taking time to get to me. But I can at least make sure all the cameras are together and they're, you know, close to where I am. Yeah. So it's constantly monitored take to take, and we will rejam as needed.
You know, unless a audio recorder has been powered down or hard shut down, its timecode clock is going to have a certain amount of, you know, hysteresis in it. It's going to maintain its clock for quite a long time before it gets powered back up.
He can look at all of his cameras and he can monitor whether or not they're staying in sync.
Now, the one thing you do have to be conscious about looking at a monitor, though, is oftentimes a monitor will have some form of latency depending on who's sourcing it from you. So Video Village might be sending you a picture that might have gone through some kind of frame conversion or whatever it might be. So you still want to go from one master clock source and jam each individual camera or device on set, including the timecode slate.
Yeah, so this is the sync box, the JB1s that I have from a company called Denicky. They're really great. This thing is barely bigger than a 9-volt battery. and it's, you know, it runs for 140 hours, I think, on one charge, and it recharges in an hour. So there's that. These are usually sent to camera, jam sync sent to camera. This is the slate, the TSC from Denicky that we use, which you can, you know, you plug right in here, it sees the signal and jams, and yeah.
It's you can obviously check visually whether you're within the second, but how is there any way you do it? Is there any signal you have to check that it's to the frames are all exactly right?
No, I go back to my timing as a drummer, and I go, wow.
Yeah. Okay.
Right,
Well,
right.
one way you can do that, you can take a timecode source, plug it into a 688 or a 8 series, and you can see what the difference is. You go to the
Oh,
jam
okay.
menu,
Yep.
you can look and see if
Look at the
there's a
difference, right.
frame offset or whatever it might be. So that's
Yep.
one kind of quick and easy way if you're on set. But if you're already doing that, you're probably just going to rejam anyways.
Yeah,
makes
we're more or less eyeballing it.
Can you explain what jam sync is to the audience?
Chris, I can certainly do that. The easiest way to think about that is time code is multiple clocks all running on the same time base, and you synchronize the clocks. It's as simple as that. So when you jam sync clock A to clock B, clock A and B should be running and counting in the same way. So if you're counting at 2398 or 23976 is your frame rate, you want clock B to also be running at 23976. And then you apply the time value from one clock to the other, and that's called a jam. And that can be done with a hard line, or you can do it over an analog RF link. And that's just applying the clock source from one to the next.
It's
you can also hardline them.
Analogous to syncing your wireless belt pack with your receiver.
Right.
In a way, that's right. Similar.
Yeah.
And one thing to think about, you know, when we talk about audio, when we lock clocks together, we do word clock, that's on the sample. So that's going to be sample accurate. When we're talking about timecode, the SMPTE spec is only down to the frame. So the maximum resolution you have for timecode is one frame, and that's typically one, you know, maybe 30th of a second. So that's not particularly good enough if you are looking at multiple audio sources. So remember, if you're going to be jamming one audio recorder to another audio recorder, it may be within a, you know, 30th of a second. And if you took those at the very first, you know, the start of that file, that may not necessarily be, you know, sample accurate. So you still, if you have multiple audio recorders, you still want those to be word clocked together running identically. So there's no phase difference between one device to the next.
Is there something like jam sync for word clock?
I think
you still want to be hardlined.
Yeah, word clock is the alignment of the samples in each source and sound, whereas timecode is just a timecode metadata stamp as to when the take starts.
Right.
What I'm doing right now is I'm jamming. You know, this is my slate. I've powered on this is my mini rig here that I use on a lot of location jobs with a 688, and then it has some Lectro receivers. But I had this powered up, and this recorder is now generating time of day time code, so it's 10:48 and 33 seconds. And so I would basically just this cable, this loud orange cable here is coming out of the output. I'll plug it into with a 1/4-inch cable into this slate. I'll power the slate up, which is in auto mode. It'll say auto set, code 23 is the incoming time code, and now it's matching the same time code that the machine has. And I can see that here. It's hard to see on the screen for you guys. But so now I can unplug it. It will maintain that time code jam sync with this clock here. And when they close it, you'll see the date, and then there's the last two digits. What I have entered is it says 23, which is the frame rate. Some people choose to put the sound roll number 01, 02, 03 for whatever day they're shooting. So this would get handed off to the AC, the camera assistant who would be in charge of slating takes, and this lives with them for the whole day.
Who and when decides what kind of time code you're going to be using on a particular shoot?
That'll usually be part of a workflow call with post-production. but more often than not, in the absence of any information, it's usually for HD shoots, anything on HD video, it's going to be 23976, 48 kilohertz sampling rate, and a 24-bit resolution.
Make an effort to label things, what kind of time code you're using, or?
That's part of our sound reports, which is our, nowadays our recorders will generate CSV sound reports that go with the files. When I first started, we actually had to handwrite the sound reports because machines didn't do that at that point. So, but that's all part of that metadata. That's what we call metadata. It's the information about this information.
One thing that's important to note in timecode is, there's integer timecode and non-integer, and 23976, 2997, those are non-integer codes. So what's happening there is those are going to be running different from the time of day clock. So the time of day clock will shift compared to those in a non-integer rate. You can jam 23976 and 2997. Those can be what's called cross jam, because on every second, they're going to have the same timecode value. Inter-second in the frame, they may not necessarily have the same timecode rate, but on every second. And most modern recorders, including all sound devices recorders, when we stamp the file, we stamp it on the whole second. So when you hit record, it's going to be at the top of the second. So even if somebody sets a device at 2997, but it's really 2398, those can cross jam together. And likewise, when you're 24 frame versus 25 frame, those can also cross jam together. So it's the situation where you have non-integer mixed with integer where you get some big problems. And then also recognizing that all these non-integer codes, we're not in a broadcast environment, so we don't use drop frame. Drop frame is really, much more of a broadcast thing. Production, I know almost no production that uses any kind of drop frame. Chris, have you ever used or been requested to use drop frame?
It's more a TV thing.
Right.
Yeah, I haven't. No, it's any. Yeah, usually when I started, it was 2997 non-drop. But no, I think maybe one shoot we had 30 drop frame, but I don't, and I forgot even what the reason was. But that's why it's the collaborative effort. I'm in post. I tell them, let me know whatever you want, and I will give it to you. And because that's really is for us. That's just such an easy detail to just take care of, because for us, there's many floating things in the world that we have to deal with, and luckily, if you can get a good directive from post on what time code you want, that's not something you have to worry about too often.
Is it more likely now, with the quality of the audio equipment you have, that your recorded sound will get into the final edit, as opposed to the past where they maybe relied on ADR a lot to fix things?
It's a big topic.
Yeah, I would say we certainly have really great tools to capture performances just about anywhere. Much of the decision to ADR usually comes later, when it comes to seeing how the story, all the pieces are coming together. I know historically there's been some characters that they had planned ADR because they wanted to voice the character a certain way. I think Darth Vader. Well, Darth Vader, but yeah, I mean, totally, that wasn't David Prowse. That was a whole different voice. But you're also, who was it that played the Godfather? That was all ADR character, because that's how I talk. So there are certain planned ADR things in those cases. In a lot of cases, there's a lot of misuse of the terminology too, because they'll sometimes loop a line over the back of somebody's head, and that's more or less a loop. That's not really ADR, because they're not replacing words on somebody's lip. Right,
they're adding it. Right.
Yeah, they're adding.
I think what they're asking is there more pressure on you now that there's a more likelihood that your recorded sound will get used in the final edit?
I wouldn't say more pressure. No. Nah. We do the best we can with the circumstances that we're given, and we try to take excellent notes with our sound reports, because that's usually what has to stand up for us later. But no, I don't feel an added amount of pressure because of that.
But we are not in the day where you're just doing a guide track. I mean,
Sure,
I
sure.
think we're at a day today where production sound is
The final.
overwhelmingly going to be what shows up in the picture, because we
Right.
do have the tools, and if the performance is good, you know, they're going to be able to take that performance, you know. So it's going to be limited by the performance, the acoustical space, you know, all those other considerations. You know, the gear is kind of, you know, we don't have to think about that these days.
Yep.
One thing that I learned a couple of years ago apparently is that in Bollywood, it's almost all ADR, and it's very rare for it to be production sound. Although this is beginning to change, and there's some
Yeah.
people spearheading that change. But I mean, in the U.S. and British and most European filmmaking, it's almost all captured dialogue on set now.
Why do you think that was?
There are so many regional dialects when it comes to the language that they'll do it in, you know, one, you know, dialect that the actor or the crew may know, and then they'll dub it into other dialects.
Not only that, but there's quite a few films that are taught to filmmakers in film school from classics, you know, Fellini and Truffaut, that are all ADR. None of it had onset sound. I mean, I watched one movie where there was horses, you know, trotting through a swamp land, you know, knee high on the horse, and what I'm hearing are like what sound like kids' hands in a tub going click 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 click. I'm sitting in this art house theater with people just going, this is amazing, and I'm just like, this sounds awful, you know. But this is, I mean, and it's, the films are amazing for a different reason. I mean, it was very classic. These are the building blocks of storytelling, and every filmmaker should know these building blocks. But a lot of those influences still permeate their way into a filmmaker's mindset. So, and
Right.
that's,
Well,
yeah, we can never forget that when we're on set as part of a huge crew, all of us are there serving the telling of that story by that director. And that's, so everything hinges off that director's sensibilities. If they decide they want an ADR character, they will. If they decide they want to not worry about this and just punt it to sound design later, they're going to. So it's up to us as sound mixers to know where this soundscape will end in this world and where it will begin in post. And that's when you have a perfect amalgamation of all things sound and film, is when you are watching a movie and you can't tell where the onset sound ends and the post-production begins. That's when you have a perfect balance of those things.
Right. And Chris, you worked on a picture with a director who's notorious for wanting only production sound.
Yeah, I only did a couple of days on that movie. I was covering my mentor Mark, but yeah, it was Quentin Tarantino doesn't do ADR. He doesn't if he doesn't have it in the can, it's not done. He'll reshoot it, and that's a really cool thing. That's definitely his decision, and he puts people around him that help make that happen. But yeah, that the one of the days I was on, we had to cover 2 actors in a car on a freeway, open windows. Process trailer rig, and then another one was called a biscuit, and you know, we had 40 period vehicles that were passing us and driving by us on the freeway with 40 different precision Teamster drivers in costumes driving them, and those cars are old, they're not quiet. And neither was the car we were driving in. And but yeah, so but you know, I was lucky. I was mixing there, and I had the original team. Petrushka Mirzwa was the utility, who did an amazing job getting the cast wired. Tom Hardig was the boom up, and both of them had been there the whole run of the show, so they took care of it.
What tricks did you do to make that work?
Well, we had labs on the actors, which was a challenge, because the girl in the scene had a very see-through, flat, you know, a lot of skin showing in this kind of 60s boppy girl outfit. So Petrushka did an amazing job making sure that was where it needed to be, and the camera couldn't see it. And then we also used mics in the visors. I had a couple electro transmitters with it was, and I can't remember because I have the Peter Ing Omni Goose mics, but Mark in his kit has the DPAs. So I can't remember which one Petrushka grabbed out. Honestly, I didn't even worry about that. I said, here's the transmitter. I'd found the frequencies we could use because we were on a section of freeway. I think it was the 90 freeway in LA that they had shut down on a Sunday. And so I had to find wireless frequencies that would work for that drive. And we were using, you know,
all the time.
we were using 2 on the actors, 2 on the visors, 2 mics on the visors. All those were wireless. We had the boom that was wireless because we didn't know where the slate was going to clap. And usually they start driving and they're going to clap the slate. You always have to be ready. You don't know if they're going to clap the slate inside the car or outside the car. You don't know. So I have my boom up there with his boom ready to capture what he needs to capture. We also had a playback speaker in the back seat because Quentin is one of those directors that loves music. He likes to have music whenever it's, when he needs it. And there was specifically some songs, musical artist being talked about in the scene with a specific song. So we had to have all that ready to go. And so wireless playback speaker with a couple of frequencies dedicated for that. So what ended up being 2 people in a car ended up being almost, a dozen wireless frequencies.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just to make sure you had something that was in the right place.
Right, something in the right place. And we had to see how the blocking, 2 people sitting in a car talking is one thing. That's not what this scene was. This scene was, the girl was up against the door and then she was in his lap. And then there's part of the scene where she hops over the back seat to grab something out of the back seat. There's a lot of stuff that happened in the scene. And so we had to have stuff all over the car ready to capture it. Even though they were shooting single camera, it was still a lens, a wide lens in a car like that feels wide, and it is wide, but
Petrushka,
How long did that take to shoot?
Petrushka says, thanks, Chris, for the shout out. We use DP6040s in the visors.
Okay, very good. Yeah, Petrushka would know. She definitely knows where the bodies are hidden on these shows. But we spent a whole day on that scene. And what was interesting is I didn't know until I saw the movie that they were driving in the car when I started. I started my scene, but the scene actually starts just before that when he picks the girl up on the side of the road, and then they drive the streets of Hollywood and have a chat in the car. That was all stuff Mark covered on his day with Petrushka and Tom Hardig. And then by the time they pull onto the 101, that's where it transitioned to my day. And I was there. So I would say they've probably spent at least 2 or 3 days shooting the scenes, but I picked it up from when they went on the freeway to the end of the scene. That was what we shot on my day. And I thought it was interesting because Mark and I don't necessarily use the same gear. I know he uses Electro. He might use a different recorder. He might use different mics per se, but he certainly had the option of saying, hey, come in, use my rig and do it. He didn't say that. He said, I want you to use what you're comfortable with. Bring your rig. And I was
Even though it was only a couple of day replacement?
Yeah. He said, bring your rig. And so I brought it. And actually I used this rig right here.
Yeah.
And it was, and when I watched the movie, I was pretty amazed at how those 2 scenes cut together. And I thought, and really everything that Mark taught me about, the gear is the arrows, and it's more about about the person doing the job, the brains. It's more about Petrushka and her mic placement, Tom Hardig being on the set, giving us that information, because I'm up in the cab of the car. I can't really see what's going on other than what's on my monitor. So Tom's feeding me information on what's the real world, and Petrushka's putting those pieces in place. It worked out really nicely.
By the way,
the microphone.
Petrushka says, oops, I meant 4061s.
4061s, yeah.
Anyway, do you ever record room tone in a shoot like that? A car, a noise? Do you do any just room tone recording?
We do if we think we need it. One, we shot so many takes of that with so many different just pregnant pauses in the dialogue that we
blend right in there anyway, right? Yep.
Yeah, there's a really great program out there called Isotope that can take a small sample of what they need that's the right tone and temperature, and then create it. So we make that judgment call on every scene.
Right.
If we feel there's enough gaps, places where the editor can pull it, then we don't say a word.
Do you ever use a seed or DNS?
I've used it before in audio post and dialogue editing.
But not for live. You want to record as raw as possible without processing, right?
Right. We always record raw files. I've used it before on broadcast gigs, things that I know that are going straight out, like things like this. I've used DNS for that kind of stuff, talking heads, but no. And I think I have Isotope on my laptop, so if I need to pull a file, throw it into Isotope and just do a look ahead. you know, and or if the producer has a question like, is that noise going to kill us? I can at least pull it into iZotope and go, well, if I can do this in 5 minutes just by myself, somebody who really knows iZotope could, you know, if you give them enough time, you know, and it's all about budgeting and time. If you give them enough time, it is possible. But you know, so that it really helps a producer over my shoulder weigh whether or not they want to pay to unplug this fridge and buy all the food that's in the fridge. Or not.
You mentioned having monitors for all the cameras. Does the audio person have to supply those monitors, or did the video department supply them?
I usually bring my own monitors because they are integral to my setup, and I like the way I like to run. You know, I like to have things that I can have powered that I can deal with. And I usually get video from the person on set, the video assist person who's a part of our union. They're the ones that I would get video from, but generally I'll provide my own monitors.
That's what I see most often on most rigs that I see, cart rigs anyway. Yeah, built-in monitors.
I've got 4 more posts from Petrushka. Do we just want to invite her in to tell the story herself?
She's great. Certainly couldn't go wrong with having her on.
She's got a camera and sound, absolutely.
Well, I imagine she's camping out in Italy right now.
Could be. She says she's working on her book, and
yeah,
split mind. Here she is.
You brought up you know, noise reduction. We recognize that for some applications, noise reduction is an important tool just to get usable dialogue or usable speech. So both for our 8 series and now, as of today, actually for our mix pre, we've got our noise assist algorithm.
Her mic is live now.
That is available. So it's a digital process because we've got enough processing power on these mixers that it runs a single-ended noise reduction, and you can record that. You can record the unprocessed. You can send out of a bus the processed audio. So there's a lot of flexibility in terms of routing, but it's very helpful again for live. You know, right now I've got 6 dB of noise assist dialed in on the microphone that you're listening to right here. So there's you know, there's applications for it, certainly for live stream and things like that, where you just want to have as high in speech intelligibility as you can.
Petrushka, you can speak if you want to turn your mic on.
There we go.
Am I? Oh, there I am. Hi, I'm so sorry. I'm listening, but I've also, during quarantine time, been working on a utility sound technician book. So I'm so thick in that.
As we all are, doing multiple different things. Well, thank you very much. Your connection is not that good, so just thanks for all your comments.
Thank you, Petrushka.
I'm going to take this before we get to Chris's rig. I'd like him to take us through it, but I want to jump back into these rigs and give people an idea of what these systems consist of. This picture here now, I think, will make more sense because on the upper left, you see the slate and then a bunch of wireless belt pack transmitters. What you see here is really 2 bag rigs plus everything that you might want to take with you in the car to a job using one of these rigs. So there's a larger bag rig with looks like a fairly large mixer recorder. John, what model is that? A 688 in that one? Looks like
that looks like a 688 there with a CL6 on it.
And then it's got, looks like 4 channels of wireless, maybe 6. And then the smaller bag has got a 633 in it, I believe, and then 4 channels of wireless receivers. And then there's boom mics and the blimps and all that kind of stuff. So there's a ton of gear, even in these sort of, if you want to call them, small portable rigs. And you know, these small rigs have gotten smaller and smaller. I found some, let's see here. Why isn't that advancing? There we go. This kind of shows, you know, someone might wear a bag or plop it down on a desk, but mixing from the bag is what's shown here. And that's David Martinez. I think this was from the main media workshop a few years ago, this picture. And it looks like they've got a Electro VR Field, which is our kind of battery powerable version of a rack receiver that we made a few years back. And here's an even smaller rig with one of your mix pre's in it, and a couple of wireless channels there. It looks like 4 channels altogether. And this is from Film Devices, this little kind of frame. So this is kind of almost a hybrid between a cart and a bag, but very, very compact. Here's one of the smallest rigs I could find, and the battery is actually about 1/4 of the size of this rig here.
Yeah,
2
these
channels of wireless.
Thanks.
Yeah, one of those exactly. And a mixer recorder, a couple channels of wireless, all kind of strapped together with one of these kind of 3D printed, I believe, compact frames by Audio Workbench. So there's a lot of little niche providers in this field that make these kind of little specialized things. And I mean, they could only hope to ever sell a few hundred of these, if that. But they can make, with 3D printing and everything, you can make these kind of custom devices and panels and so on. So this is an interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to add, as an end user group, production sound mixers are pretty darn small. So we're always really thankful when we have this great quality gear to work with.
Yeah, it's a specialized field, and we're all happy to be in it, and it's like a family. It's pretty close knit for the most part, and I love seeing stuff. There's a couple Facebook groups, like I think it's called Audio Bags and Carts, and I see a lot of cool pictures there. This is one that Scott Farr sent me and has been posting, and it's his distancing rig, and we're starting to see more of these. We kind of talked about it a little bit earlier, but the idea that this might be placed on set, and then the signal sent by Dante or whatever somewhere else. And so here we see a Scorpio mixer recorder and our D² receiver with a couple rack flanges so the antennas can be front mounted. And then he says that talent's wearing the receiver or the transmitter packs all day, and production is remotely monitoring this in another city. So it's going out over the internet via Dante, which I found fascinating. And to get more into that subject, I saw this video recently. This is Aaron Cujo Cooley out of Atlanta. His handle on YouTube is Atlanta Sound Mixer. He's got a couple of these videos where he talks about doing just that, having some kind of a Dante rig with a control line so that there's kind of a micro receiver / audio router in a bag or whatever. And then he's picked it up on his cart somewhere else remotely so that everybody can keep distance. And so it's kind of neat to see the innovation that's happening.
Yeah, for sure. What's funny is that I remember I did my internship with Mark Yolano in 2005, and it was on a movie called Big Mama's House 2. And that was the last movie that he did with his original Magliner cart, where he had his O1V, his divas, and his receivers were all there. And I remember each setup I had to run out his antennas to get closer to set. And but then after that, he had this new cart made by Chinda, rest in peace, Chinda, amazing cart designer. But he was one of the first, and this was probably, this was 2005. He was the first to kind of pioneer the I guess he called it the on-set cart, or the front of house cart, which had all of his wireless receivers in this front of house cart, and he used the Axiom system back then, because Dante really wasn't a thing in our world. So he used one of the Axiom digital snakes to place this, sometimes hundreds of feet away on set, so he could be in more of a standoff position and mix remotely. So yeah, I remember all of these new Dante ideas are really just kind of a revision of his initial idea of having a front of house cart that's separate from the mix cart. And I think it's really cool. Dante is one of those incredible tools that allow us to do that and to just be a lot more flexible. And I really love seeing the ideas develop in this way. Cujo's come up with some great ideas. Scott Farr has always been an innovator when it comes to building sound packages to get certain jobs done. And it's really cool to see that.
Absolutely. And we've seen Dante show up in both the wireless receivers. We've seen it in our field mixers, like it was shown on that. There was an 888 in that, and also the Scorpio. So, it's become a technology where it's showing up in small portable devices, and there's simple endpoints that are PoE, and it's just facilitating, simplifying the connection. And the fact that we can piggyback onto simple IT switches and low cost IT infrastructure is such a big benefit. And we're seeing it, in all manner of places. And now with the need to separate groups and to kind of have these multiple rings of people in a production, where the people inside the closest ring are the actual people producing, but there's people who want to monitor, they want to they want to be able to see picture and hear sound, and you've got all this busing capability, and Dante just plays right into that perfectly to extend that audio connection.
Sure.
Do you ever use any RF over fiber?
We've had a couple of people in our community starting to do that. Delroy Cornick is one of them, and then I also know Philip Palmer, who was working on he's working on a couple of shows out in New Mexico, was working on an RF over fiber rig. This was years before even. So yeah, it has been done, and but it's still new technology that we are adapting for our purpose. So that's kind of where that is. But yeah, we've seen both video over fiber and RF over fiber, which is, I think it's all very location specific stuff. It may not necessarily work in an urban environment where you have cars driving over cables and stuff, but when you're definitely in rural settings, RF over fiber is definitely a really good tool to have.
Right. But usually you aren't far from your performance area. You're usually pretty close to it, right?
Typically, but there's, you can never, every time you think you have it figured out, you don't again. So those are all really good things to have available to you. But generally, yes, we try to get as close as we can, or as close to where Village is. It kind of depends on the tone of the set, depends on what you're shooting. Sometimes I want to be within eyesight of the director, but not necessarily close to them, because
you're making noise, right?
Yeah, we just want to be at a comfortable distance. Especially my favorite directors are the ones that I don't always have to talk to. They'll just kind of look over at me, and I'm like, and that's all it takes.
How much interaction do you have with the director during the show? I mean, during the shooting? I mean, are you pretty much focused on just doing your audio, and you only interact with them when you go into post?
No, I usually by the time they're in post, I'm gone. I'm off to another project. So now my interaction with them is pretty heavy during pre-production, because I want to get to know where their sensibilities are. It's what we talked about earlier. Some directors have planned ADR, some directors, it all depends. And the thing about directors is that they all kind of will operate from their strong points, but you have certain directors that are literary people. You have certain directors like Jim Cameron started out in the art department and props. You have other directors who used to be actors. So that's where they come from. There's a couple of directors that I work with. Nick Goosen is one of them. He is really the best, like, jack of all trades that I've ran into in a long time, because he has sat in the editor's chair long enough. He's been in front of the camera enough. He's written enough scripts with his friends that he knows the pillars of the story. And so every time he calls me for something, I'm like, I know he understands. He knows, well, we wanted to do this during production. We didn't really come out the way we wanted, so I'm going to rely on the edit, or I'm going to rely on the sound design to help push that over the top. He knows how to use all of those tools. So he's one of the best directors to work with, just because of that reason. But you have to learn where your directors are coming from. Every time you get a new director, you want to learn what their sensibilities are, and you want to help. At the end of the day, we're there to help them tell their story. And that's hopefully we get that dance straight during pre-production, so when production starts, we don't actually have to talk that often.
So that in the pre-pro meetings, you sort of get a sense. If you've never met the person before, you get a sense of what they're talking about there.
Yeah, and you do your homework. You check out their past work. You check out sometimes I can, if they've had DPs that I've worked with before, I can call them and say, how are they to work with? Just things, because this is all about sensibilities. It's all about interpretation, and sharing complex ideas, in those moments. And when you're the pre-production days are always the cheapest days for production. You don't want to be standing on the set on a very expensive shooting day trying to figure out your basic creative building block.
You got to have the details down to start, right?
Yeah, because you're there.
Same note, What do you use for frequency coordination? What software do you use for frequency coordination?
I'm still a generation back. I still have my, like I have the 2 original venues that I have on my big rig, and then I have this field venue here along with some 411s. So what I use for field coordination on that is the app on the phone, Freak Finder, which is a really great app to use. But there's also a wireless designer. I know that when I move into the wideband venues and make that jump, I'll get into wireless designer, and that'll be the way to go.
Yeah, the
Well,
app
we're going
on
to talk about that.
quite amazing.
Yeah, a lot of the field guys are using it because it's portable, goes with them, and it's really not directly tied to any equipment. It's kind of like a portable version of IAS, which is what a lot of the venue, guys are using. And just I want to mention that on Friday we're going to do a deep dive on the D-Squared, which is this receiver system, but also get into wireless designer and how all this stuff is integrated and how relatively easy it is to do frequency coordination. But you can also tie in stuff that's offline, like Chris's equipment that's not tied directly to wireless designer. Those older units don't have a network connection. So we'll get into that Friday. That's another session altogether.
Definitely. Before the show, John was showing me a mixer that was only this big, but probably had more power than most studio consoles. Which one was that, John?
Well, we'll first start out with this. This is our little MixPre 6, and you've seen a couple of photos of this. And when Sound Devices first started, our first products were all analog. And we came out in 2004 with a recorder called the 744T. That was a 4-channel recorder with, it was often paired with a 442 mixer, which is a 4-input mixer. And that combination was, this large but very capable for 2004 kind of product. And, that recorder was $4,200 when we first introduced it. The mixer was about $3,000. And now in a box that's powered off of 4 AA batteries, you have essentially that capability with 4 microphone preamplifiers, couple extra inputs, the ability to run a real-time single-ended noise reduction plugin, the ability to run, automatic mixing, and this thing retails for about $900. So where we've come in terms of technology and things getting smaller and smaller, it's this kind of blows me away when I look at it, just kind of thinking and knowing where we came from. The other product I had was this is Scorpio. This is the kind of the superset of all of our production mixers. This has 16 microphone preamplifiers. It has 12 audio buses, 32 channels of Dante, tons of output, full multi-track recorder with master timecode clock.
What is the model of that?
This is the Scorpio.
Scorpio.
So this is this is a product we introduced last year, and we keep adding new tools to it with hardware accessories. So there's a linear fader controller called the CL16. This also works with some of our other linear fader controllers. But really, kind of what this represents is that in a box that's this size that I'm holding with a single hand and powered off of, a NP type battery, this has all the capabilities that a QL has, the same number of mic pre's, all this busing, built-in Dante, built-in automatic mixing with both Dugan and Mix Assist, the ability to run our, noise reduction plugins. The miniaturization and the ability to deploy something like this is kind of why production has continued to shift. We're on set and we can now have 16 actors at a time talking, and they're all double talking, and we can record all those ISOs and do that partially because we can put this on a little cart or in a bag, and we can drag this down the street or bring it up into a castle and
so those 16 preamps, you can route in there out the 16 Dante outputs right into your recorder.
Well, this is an integrated recorder. This has a 256 gig SSD, 2 SD cards, so this is a full master recorder. So this is where your dialogue.
You almost don't need the actors anymore.
Almost.
And again, it all goes back to the microphone. We're now at a point where we can deploy microphones as we need, whether they're going to be booms, whether they're going to be wireless, whether they're RF, whether that lav is a hard line or an RF link or whatever it might be. We have the IO capability to be able to cover that. We came out with this because we came out with the 744T back in 2004, and we had 2 mic pre's on and we had 2 additional line ins. And the first things people said is, we need more mic ins. All right. So then, the next generation was more inputs, and the next generation was more inputs. And we had, one customer in particular who was just hitting us with and saying, I am running 2 788s simultaneously, sometimes bringing in a third. This was a, big ensemble, period, well-known show. And so we came out with this, and so this really kind of covers it. And then the first question was, well, can I put 2 of these together? And well, actually, you can. That's actually one of the benefits of Dante. So now you can use Dante from one device to the next, and you can have all the files, land on one recorder. So you can record on one device if you have 2 of these linked, 32 channels. And I think back, the first time I saw a digital multi-track recorder, a dash recorder from Sony. I don't know if you remember those. That
3324.
It was, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of dollars. And here we are now, able to have all this mixing, routing, multi-track recorder, and hold it in a single hand. It's just it's really pretty fun to see, and it'll be fun to see where things continue to go, because we're just getting going on this stuff.
Well, in 2004, John, that you're talking about, that's when I joined Lectrosonics, and the standard belt pack size was something like this, and this was considered compact. I mean, if you look at some of the older stuff that came before this is a little smaller than a deck of cards and runs on a 9-volt. And then now, of course, we got stuff that's just a fraction of that size, that's got more stuff in it, wider tuning bandwidth, more features, more flexibility. It does the response to the mobile app from New Indian to change the settings over the lav mic like a modem. I mean, it's incredible what they, what we as an industry have packed into such tiny packages, But Chris, why don't you take us through your rig? I want you to have a chance to show us the routing and how all that stuff's put together.
Yeah, I was going to say, which is great that you guys are innovating so much, because especially on the RF side, our band that we're allowed to use legally in the U.S. has been shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. So our distro for us, we may not use as many channels, but we are often thrown into all these different places where it's just the Wild West. We don't know what's going on. I can't tell you how many times I've been in Los Feliz, powered up my IEMs to hear a pirate Mexican radio station.
Right.
So.
Right.
You never know who's got what out there.
Tuning bandwidth has changed too. I mean, this is a unit that tuned across 25 megahertz, and then these tune 75, and then the newest stuff goes 140 meg. And there's some that have more than that even. But the idea now is to cover everything that's legally available, so you can pick and choose. The challenge, of course, is to get the filtering to be even better than it ever was before, because you've got so much more RF information coming into the front end. So that's that's the challenge now.
I do have some pictures to show of gear and setups. Let's see. How do I share my screen?
I'll show you how to do it here. Chris, I have to switch this over to you.
I thought I knew, and then I knew I didn't know.
Well, I have to turn it on for you. Now select what you want to show and just say show it.
Okay, showing main screen.
That's fine.
Oh, where am I? Here. Okay, yeah. So let's see. This, I talk about my first bag rig. That's what this was. And this, that was my PST.
Cascade recorder. Yeah.
Yeah, PST M4 Mark II mixer. And then my first movie actually didn't have the recorder. This was added later. It's just a 2-track recorder. It could take incoming timecode, so I would have a sync box in the bag and jam it. I would set the time on my slate, jam the sync box, and it was a whole thing. But this was the first rig, and the MM1 was only there to boost the output, this headphone output here. Can you see what I'm pointing at with my little?
Oh, yes.
Yep,
Okay.
I can see it.
There was just a headphone splitter because I knew I wanted the director to hear exactly what I was hearing. And so one side went to me, the other side went to this MM1, which boosted it up to line level, so the Comtech here could send it to the director. And this is, this is my first year of working, so it was a huge bag because I carried a lot of stuff in it from time to time, but it was not, terribly heavy. But when you talk about, when you talk about going to, let me see if I can see what's there. Yeah, when you talk about going to different locations, this was a movie called Valley Girl, where we had to go to one of our locations. Valley Girl, it's a remake of the 1980s movie. They remade it as a like kind of a teen musical, but like a jukebox movie. But it just came out less than a month ago. And but this was one of our locations at the top of Mulholland, where you can literally see the valley on one side and Hollywood and LA on the other side. We shot a lot of musical coverage up there. But this is the old Nike missile silo or Nike missile warning station that's now decommissioned, but they still have a lot of RF transmitting and receiving stuff up there. And
did that get in your way?
Yeah, there was definitely
looks
stuff
like
going
you're using UHF and VHF there.
Yeah, and the thing is when I did my scans, you could definitely see where they were, and I knew I had to operate around them. I didn't know if they were variable at all, so I was always checking and rechecking to make sure. If I heard any kind of weirdness on my wireless gear, I would go back to the scans and check it. But we only had to duck and dodge a couple of times over the few days we were there. But when you can imagine rolling your cart up this hill and then seeing this, going, okay, well, we'll have to figure this out. And
really, that's a fundamental difference between a production mixer and somebody working in a studio or doing a corporate industrial. I mean, you've got to contend with these realities that are totally different.
Yeah, this is another view of that same location. The spot we were in is directly behind this big area, and it's very prominently featured in the movie. But yeah, and we were there all night long for almost a week. So when we did the Quentin Tarantino stuff, I used this. This is actually the rig I have behind me. This is when I first got it from the builder. Gene Martin built it for me. I drew him a little picture. When the CL12 came out, this control surface, this is what was kind of the genesis of this rig, because I knew I wanted to be able to mix on faders but maintain bag-like portability when it came to power.
Zoom in a little bit on it. Zoom in a little on that picture right there. There we go. Perfect. And then spread it out. Perfect.
Yeah. And so it started out with 6 411s. The 688 was there. I have my smaller Comtech transmitters in the back, which I ended up switching to larger ones. And then I have 3 batteries here that run off of this PST triple play. This PST triple play has 3 power inputs, which is really great. It's designed to draw power from whatever is getting the most power. So it would draw down these batteries equally at the same time. What I ended up doing for long-term use is I switched one of those inputs to AC, and then I have 2 running batteries still, and that's really good, because then when I am near a plug, I can plug it in and save my batteries. But if I do get in a spot where I'm going to be I know I'm going to be remote for a while, then I'll just set up all 3 batteries and drain them down. And I have enough of those batteries and they're constantly charging. I can stay that way indefinitely.
And you can change them, hot swap them?
Yes. Yeah, totally hot swap them. This is what it looks like when it's taken out of the rig. This was actually the start of the rig. We called it the tabletop rig. And just for this reason, I can just carry it into a house. I was doing commercials at the time. There was a string of commercials we did for a French eyewear company called Affalou. And they would bring their whole crew from France to here to LA to shoot with Sharon Stone. And so we ended up shooting in a lot of like fancy Malibu mansions that didn't allow carts at all in the location. And some of them had just too many stairs, like carts. The camera carts were all parked outside in the driveway, and the ACs were having to schlep gear and lenses in and out. This I pulled this right out of my car, carried it with 2 hands, and walked right in the front door. And I put it on a counter and downstairs, remoted my antennas, and we were in business. And it was just a really good way to work for that. Let's see here. I'm gonna make this little smaller so I can see them all. Let's see, but this this is always funny. Whenever I get mad about having to troubleshoot, I think about this guy. I just remember that my life is not so bad, it could be worse. It could always be worse. So yeah, that's just one of my fun pictures. But what else? There was oh yeah, the portability is really important. This was us working on a movie. Totally forgot the title of the movie, but it was a love story. It was very romantic, but we were doing all this boat-to-boat coverage. And my boom op took this picture of me. We're sitting in this dinghy in the Pacific Ocean, doing shots of the actors in this boat. You can see those are our 3 actors there. The little girl, and if I could only remember which movie this was, I honestly can't. I covered the end of it for a friend of mine. But anyway, this was when we first started. I hadn't remoted the antenna yet, and they were right there. And then once I realized the plan was to keep them close, our boat driver kept drifting further and further away. So I ended up having to deploy that antenna to make sure we got all the performances correctly. But yeah, but being able to just take a bag rig recorder, that's a 633 in there, some 411 receivers. Those are extra context because I knew people were going to be in the boat going, oh, you know what, I want to hear this, and wouldn't think about it until we rolled. So that's
Right.
that's just me thinking ahead. And I have a little magic arm right there to hold my phone, just because I use it, for the frequency coordination. I use it for so many things. I have script pages on it that I'll as we're mixing the scene, I'm going from this source to that source to this source. I think I had 3 labs in this, 3 labs and a boom on this rig, and everything we heard, it's like sometimes we wanted to just hear the dialogue and it was intimate. Sometimes there were wider shots of the boat going, and we wanted to hear that. So it's just that mix is prioritizing all those decisions, that coverage, to match what that exact moment of the story that you're telling.
When you're remoting the antenna, is that you mean putting a paddle on instead of the whips?
Yeah, you can. In fact,
Yeah, somebody just asked when you were remoting the antenna, you obviously weren't remoting it very far because it's a boat. It can't go more than 25 feet. But
true,
but
a
directional antenna instead of the omnis.
Well, what I use is the RF venue antenna here, and it has a directional source and then an omni source.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, but even then, just having that up and away from all of the water and meat sacks around,
right? Yeah.
Was much better.
Height.
Line of sight to the
Absolutely. So and we do the same thing when it comes to car work as well, because like this, let me find the first picture. Like this rig is in a car. We're doing driving shots, and you can see I have 2 pictures there on my monitor. There's 2 cameras, and that's 633, 411s. But you can see like here, all these RF terminals are going to this PST. It's an RF multi, and then I have 2 antenna cables coming out of this RF multi, and they are mounted right here. No, here. Yeah. So yeah, they're mounted right there. And so you can see my bag. It's a different rig, but same concept though. The antennas are all coupled there, and then I have my 2 cables coming out to this same PSC or the same RF venue shark fin. And then
the omnis are your listen boxes or your IFBs?
The shark fin also has the 2 side horizontal.
The omnis on the side here with the
the Comtech transmitters.
Yeah.
Those are transmitting. Those are transmitting to the Comtech receivers for the director and for my crew. I have a public and a private line. So when my crew, I had somebody on the back of the truck while I was inside the truck. That private line just allows me to, for them to hear the mix, but then I can communicate with them privately. And then the public is for the director, which is that's anybody who wants to listen. So yeah, that requires 2 transmitters. So that's why there's a total of.
Do you ever use any kind of wireless comm?
Not necessarily. That me
No.
being able to talk privately
Walkie,
to my
yeah.
crew this way works. I do have a walkie on the cart typically, so I can hear just what production is talking about. That's a good stream of information to follow.
Right.
But in my crew, I generally have them wearing a lav. If I know we're going to be geographically separated and we need to communicate, I'll just
So
put a
you
lav
build
on.
your own comm system, right?
Yeah, I put a lav on
Right.
them and then route it to the private, and that's that's what we do. Let's see what
Mhm.
else. There's the we have this stuff. This is on a show called S.W.A.T, where we did. This is called a blind drive, where we have the actors will be inside the car, pretending they're driving, and the camera will either be in the car with them or mounted on the hood, looking through the windshield, or they could have door mounts, looking, raking 2 shots across the driver and the passenger. But the person on top is the one actually doing the driving. There's a stunt driver up there who's driving the car for real, and they're usually up there in the roll cage and a helmet, and you can kind of see this right up here is my Comtech antenna. And so what I did is I put that Comtech antenna there because I wasn't going to be riding along. We ran the cable down into the trunk where I would drop my bag, and that's what they were talking about, a bag drop. So when it came time to shoot, we had to pull over to make some adjustments. But you can see my bag right there, and then the cables running out and up to the antenna on top. This allowed me to hit record and let them drive away, and we followed in a follow van where the director could watch the video relay and they could listen to it on my context system, and they would just roll a series take where they would go through the same set of dialogue while they're driving, 3 or 4 times, and then we'd pull over and make adjustments, go to a different camera angle, and then keep driving. But this really is the safest way so that a driver can act and not have to actually drive. And then we get to use our bag drop system there, and it's a really great system to work. But S.W.A.T has a really impressive collection of vehicles. They have this is the detectives car version of this. They have a blind drive of a regular squad car, and the other vehicles. They all have a blind drive version of them. So it's really, really cool to see. These are some of the other vehicles we have on that show. This huge thing is called the Gurkha, and it's an armored car that they use to deploy their SWAT teams in, and that thing is an RF bunker too. So when they're in there shooting, it can be a challenge. Luckily, most of the dialogue coverage is the main unit mixer. The main mixer on the show is Paul Maritzis, and he brings me in to do B units, or at least he did in previous seasons.
What vehicle with your equipment sitting on the dash? You had your whole pack sitting up on the dash of a very, very large car.
Mm-hmm.
Looked bigger than a van.
I think that show was LA's Finest. I think that's what that was. Yeah, those are the stand-ins. But yeah, that's a very tall rig for sure. And we had and it had to be a tall rig because, and I don't have any shots of the actual camera, but they had a what they call it was a camera on a jib arm, on a telescoping jib arm that would go all the way around the car and do these moving shots. And so they had to have the really big tow rig for that, so that the camera, everything had enough room for the arm and all that stuff.
So the car was riding on a trailer for that one.
Yes, in fact, I have here's a version of it. You can see it.
Right.
This is kind of a far away view, but you can see the car here is on a very low trailer, and then this is what they call the shot maker, is the truck that pulls it. Generally, it's usually a late 70s or a late 80s pickup truck that's been converted, and it has all the grip railing around it. This was and honestly, I forgot what show this was too, but the director is usually up here with the script supervisor riding in there. I'm usually in the cab, and my boom op is usually sitting on the back, relaying information, letting us know what's going on. And then when we do have to pull over and make an adjustment, I can stay in the cab and listen to the adjustment while my boom op or my utility jumps off and actually deals with the talent and what's going on in the car. Car rigs generally take 2 people for that reason, because you need somebody listening as well as somebody adjusting. But yeah, but that's a process trailer rig. The other rig, another type of rig you have, and I don't have any pictures of it. It's called a biscuit, and we used it on Once Upon a Time in Hollywood for one of the shots. And a biscuit is basically a trailer that is self-powered, and so it has in the front of it, it has like a lot like what you saw on top of the blind drive. It had a roll cage like that with the it had one of these up in front of the trailer, and that person could drive it. And it's a very noisy rig, and generally it can get noisier because all those lights have to be powered by something. So they're usually generators that are running. They sound crazy. So you're always kind of managing, listening to the stuff and trying to see what is going to translate and take us out of the story and what's not. Because at least we knew on Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I knew already there was going to be a lot of noise coming from the freeway, a lot of noise, coming from the passing cars, that I was like, you know what? The generators are loud, but they're not, they're loud here, but they may not necessarily be loud there where the actors are. And luckily that was one of those situations too, where the actors knew, Brad Pitt just knows how to perform for his environment. He knows he has to be louder than what is going on around him. So he's very good at interpreting his performance for that without actually losing the performance. So, those are the things. But there's a couple other things I can point out to here. This is a movie called Unicorn that we did, and this is just an example of A camera versus B camera. You have A camera here that's shooting the school bus coming up, and you have this. Obviously, this is a geography shot, but then you have B camera grabbing a medium of what is a dialogue performance, and these are happening simultaneously. So these are the challenges that we have to deal with. Now on paper, this is going to be, two lavs and a boom just by looking at it. But the bus driver might say something like, "Hey, get in," or there's certain story points that have to come out. So as the plans for these shots develop, this is what we're looking at, going, all right, well, what are the other things? Even if we had medium, even if we were only shooting this shot by itself, you have to take into account things like the sunlight. You can see the shadows here in the wide shot. They're directly under the talent. That means if a boom's overhead, that shadow is going to be there too. So even if we're just shooting this shot, this boom operator may not be able to do a hard cue between the two actors, because that shadow will pass right over the unicorn, which is a real horse. And when you're booming around a horse is interesting. We did this whole thing leading up to it. As soon as the horses came onto the set, and I've worked on a few movies now with horses, it's a good thing to have the boom operator with the boom and the big fuzzy thing on it just walk up to the horse, say properly supervised, but walk up to the horse, introduce them to the boom, let them see it, let them smell it, let them hear your voice, and that way when you're on the day and you might have to cue, the horse knows, hey, this is I recognize that. That's a boom. Yeah. Hey. Yeah. So and a lot of this is is us working in close proximity to talent. We're up in their business. Our hands are on them, in their clothes. That's Danny Glover, and we were shooting an indie feature. It was something that at the time we were shooting it had no distribution, and it was kind of a low budget job that a couple of friends were doing. And I said, great, well, let's do it. And this is the kind of intimacy we have with the talent sometimes, and they have to be comfortable with you. You have to be comfortable with them. I remember doing this commercial.
Those monitors you showed before, they were your monitors, right?
Yes. Yeah. Those are mine.
And you have those because you like those monitors. They work with your rig. But if you didn't have it, would the camera people provide something for the audio operator?
Generally, no.
Requested it? No.
No, usually on sets like this one, we have a video assist person, a video assist engineer on set, and they're actually responsible for disseminating the video information from the camera. And if you
didn't have a monitor, they could supply one maybe?
You would have to ask for that ahead of time.
Right.
And yeah, so that's a possibility. You would not get it from camera. If camera is having to deal with picture on lower budget stuff, they're
No.
probably no. That's a short answer. They're not
Right.
going to schlep around another monitor for you because the camera ACs already
Yep.
have enough to.
Do any of those mixing units that you have or John has have an iPad or remote app?
Yeah, I use Wingman quite a bit, especially when I'm doing remote rolls from when I have the rig in the trunk of a car. It's nice to be.
What does Wingman do?
Let's see.
Wingman is a iOS or Android app that controls the 6 series recorders. So it's
okay.
it's an app that you run on your phone. You can see levels, you can see file names, you can update your file metadata. One of the things that a sound mixer has to do, in addition to recording all the material, it's when you're generating so many different files, you have to manage that we use metadata. So
information, right?
So there's track names are important because those show up all the way into the edit. The file naming syntax, that's going to be something that production decides. This is how we want to have our file name syntax. And then you can add metadata notes. Timecode is metadata, user bits are metadata. So all this stuff lands in the file, and that file and all that metadata travels all the way through the post-production chain so that the last post mixer can see all those notes. So Chris can type in, airplane flew overhead, and punch that in onto a specific file, and that carries with it all the way through the file.
Is your record medium kept with the camera medium when they're done with the shot? Do you put them together in the same box, sort of thing?
We usually do. Some shows they'll have us. We'll usually do one sound roller per day. So at the end of the day, I'll pop my card out.
The whole thing,
yeah.
Right?
The first thing I do is make sure that the sound report is there with it, and then I back it up onto my laptop before I hand it off to anybody. I want a copy of it, because we've had sound rolls lost. We've had things just happen.
Right.
So
you don't run dual records.
Yes, occasionally I do. And even the 688 will at least record to 2 cards at one time. And then if there's like the Afaloo commercials with Sharon Stone, they knew they didn't want to have to do any extra stuff with that. So I did run a backup recorder for that stuff, just because I wanted those safeties there. That was a performance they wanted. They came a long way to get it, paid a lot of money to get it. So yeah. I ran a backup for that. And even my basic.
You used the phrase user bit. What is that?
Did I just say that? Oh, I think I used it. Oh, that was.
I don't know.
Just saying.
Somebody
user
asked
bits
what is a user bit, but you must have used it in a phrase.
Yeah, I did. Well, the timecode metadata, and as Chris was showing there.
Oh, okay, the user bits. Okay.
Yeah.
Right there.
Which would be the name of the show or something like that. Or
in this case, it's the date. And the last 23 is the frame rate of the recording. The 22nd of June. Yeah.
Yeah, that's part of the SMPTE spec. So, a SMPTE timecode signal has both the timecode value and user bits. And user bits can be, whatever somebody decides they want to use them for.
Yeah, so now I have this. Yeah, this is Wingman, and I have it now actually hooked up to my bag rig, which is here. And so now I can actually change the title of each track. I can name the tracks. I can arm the tracks, disarm the tracks. I can, I can start and stop the files. I can. It allows me to do a lot of things and not have to be right next to the bag necessarily. So
is that an iOS available app that you can just download, or is it a?
Yes. Yeah, John. Right, John?
Yeah, it's a free app. You have to buy a several $1,000 recorder in order for it to work, but the app is free. Yeah.
Basically controlling your recorders, right?
Yes,
exactly. With every free app, you buy a recorder. Got it.
Yes, and it helps us justify our daily rentals when the producer can see lights, things that blink up and down.
What do you do to do a backup? You just do a copy to another disk?
Well, on the 688, it's great because it actually records to 2 different cards at once. It records to a CF and an SD at once. But for a backup recorder, I mean, I've run, a 744T, just a separate recorder with a separate, you know, a separate audio input going into it. To have two
Well, like
totally.
if you do a record for the entire day, what do you normally back that up to? The whole.
Generally, I don't record the entire. Well, I mean,
You
for
said
me,
you one media for the whole day shoot.
yeah, that's just me copying it to my laptop as a backup.
Okay.
Okay. That's after the fact. That's not necessarily a backup recording like when we're showing. Right. Yeah, like when I have two different recorders recording the same thing independently, so that if one happens to one machine, I still have the other.
What do you think of the 788T?
I think it was such a great recorder that even when the 6 series came out, it did not replace the 7 series because so many users love their 788Ts so much. They were so accustomed to it. They love the mic freeze that when the 6 series came out, the 6 series had certain things about it that the 788T users didn't like. The 788T users loved that it had a hard drive in the recorder. They had a hard time calling 6 series a recorder because it didn't have a hard drive in it. I'm like, to me, it didn't necessarily matter because we're recording onto cards anyway. But the 788T definitely is still to this day a very viable, really good recorder to have. If all your recording is 8 tracks or less, it's awesome.
You know, Peter, you're talking about redundancy, and I think it's all a matter of how important is the production. Lectrosonics and Sound Devices both have devices that at the transmitter can be recorders, so you can turn the device into a recorder instead of a transmitter. In some markets you can have dual function and some of that. So it's all a matter of how important is something and what your level of redundancy is.
Right.
You'll see sometimes people have 2 microphones. Well, are those going to the same signal path? Because that's not really redundant. But if they're going to 2 unique signal paths, there's a certain redundancy. So it all is a matter of, how important is it? And,
how possible is it for you to redo the shoot? If you're blowing something up, it's got to be perfect the first time.
Right. Live versus, recorded, you got to decide exactly what that continuum looks like, because sometimes, you can redo the performance if something fails. But, typically in the world that, that Chris and Karl and I are in, and even any professional, if your gear fails you, if you don't know your gear, you will not be called out for that next project. So, you've got to have high reliability and know how to use your gear and know how to work around things when something may not go as expected.
Right.
One thing's for sure, your death can be quick and quiet, and you'll never know it happened, and you'll only find your phone doesn't ring again. And the standards are very different typically for camera than it is for sound. Camera is accustomed to working with rented cameras from gear from a rental house. We're owner operators, so there's an extra level of expectation for us. If they're going to pay us for our gear, then it's got to work. So our gear is directly.
Why do you think that is? It's just that a cameraman can't afford to buy a $100,000 camera?
The gear is very expensive is one thing, but then the trends for camera change so often. The cameras you might use for narrative that you're not going to use for reality, and vice versa. So there's just too many tools out there for a DP to buy a camera package. Now there's some DPs I know that own camera packages, but they'll use them for their corporate jobs or their smaller jobs. They'll use them for things, it just helps them pull the gig together. But generally on these larger shoots, I mean, they'll pick specific lenses with specific camera bodies for
There's so many different options. You can't own them all. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. If I could share my screen one more time, I wanted to give you an example of backup recording.
You still have control of it, I think.
Let's see.
Yeah, you're still sharing.
Little menu under the circle with the triangle in it, under the sharing menu. You're still sharing it.
You're still going. Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, here we go. So this was a string of dates we did with Adam Sandler. We did them at the Hayward Theater and then again at the El Rey. These were dates that ended up on his Netflix comedy special, the last one. And this is the rig we used to record it. You can kind of see here, we were setting up the stage and doing all that stuff. But this is my larger rig, and obviously I have my original venues there that weren't used on this particular job. But we had my primary recording was this. It was boom recorder, and then we also ended up using this Sound Devices 688 here as a backup recorder, which was getting just redundant, identical redundant audio signals into the 688. And then not only that, the front of house was also using a Behringer console, kind of like this one, and we set up a third recorder with boom recorder running off of that front of house system, just as a purely redundant third recorder. So so for a show like this, where we were working up to a curtain time, we had a live audience, you know, we had 3 different recorders going at any given time. And that's what we use. And this is me. I'm tucked away in this tiny little office, which was kind of a part closet, part office, and it's directly behind the back wall of this stage. So I was in this kind of claustrophobic little room with just my one little monitor here to watch the main picture. I think we had 6 cameras in the room, maybe more, which they were all, you know, time code synced. And then so that's, you know, that was the rig for that show. I don't know if I have any more from the Sandler shoots. This might be one. Yeah, same rig, different spot. But let's see. Well, yeah. So that was one of those shows where I really wanted to have a redundant, you know, backup recording system for that, because
what was that keyboard drawer that was pulled out? What's the keyboard connected to?
The keyboard, let's see. Oh, it's probably connected to the computer that's running boom recorder. This boom recorder is running off a Mac Mini, which is directly behind this monitor.
Got it.
And it's, yeah, boom recorder it's just an amazing little, you know, I think it's still a $300 program that you can use. You know, but you do have to have a working computer, and on location that's not always possible. So that's why it's, you know, it's a great tool, but it's not a catch-all for everything. But oh yeah, you're talking about this. Yeah, so that computer is gonna slide out. This whole thing slides out, and then the computer keyboard's on another slide-out drawer. And this is actually a little mouse, trackpad mouse that I have mounted to the chair.
Drum
so
chair,
I can just,
right, there we go.
Yeah, so I can just sit there and, you know, drive the ship. Yeah, so it's one Mac Mini with two displays, and yeah, it's nice to have the real estate to just get things done.
When you have a bag with all your RF in the same bag, don't you ever have issues with intermod?
Yes, but that's usually not because the RF is in the same bag. That's usually a frequency selection thing.
Yeah, you pick the wrong rates, right?
Yeah, and that's something you trip over. I think when you go from let's see, when you go from like I started out with Sennheiser G2s, which I think only have a 30 milliwatt transmitting power, and that allowed me to just kind of, you know, and I wasn't really tracking frequencies at that point. They have this little scan function on them that you can use, but it's not crazy reliable. I remember when I first made my big Electro purchase, that was the first thing I tripped on was intermods, because now, and this is something it took me a little while to learn, was that now I'm not playing with a 30 milliwatt transmitter, I'm playing with a 100 milliwatt transmitter, and that is a more powerful tool, and intermods are a lot more, you're sensitive now to intermods a lot more. So so learning how to coordinate all those frequencies together, not only your frequencies with each other, but also what you can use in that geographic location.
What's going on around you? And a common problem, although Peter, you're on the right track with asking about having all that stuff together in a bag. And a common thing is to have some kind of COM or HOP transmitter that's sending a signal out of the bag.
So that really don't be the only transmitter in the bag.
Generally, yes. Only a couple, 1 or 2 channels of transmitter in the bag, but having all that within just a few inches of each other. And that's a common thing that we recommend, is like try to get that bag transmitter, you know, physically as far away in the bag or on the outside of the bag. Even just a few inches can make a big difference.
Yeah, and that's, you know, in the Comtech transmitters that I use are still 10 milliwatts. So that's this big saving grace of those, is that it's at a lower frequency level, 216 megahertz. It's much bigger. but it's also only 10 milliwatts.
Very
So
low, right.
yeah. So if I were to switch it out with something more powerful, like I've used my BST 75, which is a 100 milliwatt transmitting power, that having that right next to your receivers,
So
sure.
what electro equipment is typically the bag to camera connection?
Electro.
A lot of times that'll be a SMQV, which is a transmitter that's variable power. You can set it at 50, 100, or even 250 milliwatts, and then it'll go to a single channel receiver like an LR or a dual channel like an SR on the camera. But you're not sending audio to cameras very much on what you do, Chris, are you?
No, on narrative, we very, very little. I haven't done it in a long time, actually. The only time I did it was on a car-to-car setup where the follow van needed to have uninterrupted sound. So I opted to send a camera feed audio in from the bag drop in hardline into the camera, so that the audio is embedded in camera and could then travel over the microwave to the van. That's the only time I've done it. Actually, in this last job I did for ESPN, I used the I used a couple of M2Rs on the camera, stereo receivers, Electro M2Rs, and the transmitter was what's
Probably
the two-channel?
DCHT, the miniature stereo digital transmitter.
Yeah, so that's what I used for this last ESPN thing. So I had that in my bag, the DCHT and two M2Rs one on each camera.
Yeah, the bag transmitter is more an ENG kind of thing than a film.
And
For sure.
reality
Right.
shoots use them a lot. Yeah. Well, we've crossed the 1 o'clock line here, or at least local time. I guess it's 3 out there. I'd like to open up the floor to any remaining questions, anything we didn't cover.
I've been pretty much keeping up with them as they go along. Let me see if there's any I skipped over here. Any thoughts?
Carl, you had one. Carl, you had one show and tell. I just wanted to show. This is
it's the latest Nagra. There we go.
Yeah, this is a
42 channels in one little box.
Yeah, this is what, about 6 minutes on this reel here?
There we go. There we go.
It's mono, right? It'd be mono.
This one's mono. Yeah.
I did all my tape stuff in music studios. I never had to do it on location, so I'm thankful for that. That's oof.
It's a different world, but those machines are wonderful machines. Yeah.
What discussions have you had about how we're going to go ahead with the COVID situation on sets and how we're going to have to protect people we work with?
The industry has really pulled together in the last, 2.5, 3 months, ever since the shutdown. I know for us, we have, as far as sound, we've with our local union, we've worked together to pull all the information together necessary to be able to articulate what it will take to keep our gear clean. We've come up with the best practices for that, and then we're also working with the other governing bodies, DGA, SAG, AMPTP, and we are, all of those things are being considered when it comes to the best practices for the set as a whole, because there's so many moving parts. Two things: there's so many moving parts to any given shoot, and no two shoots are ever exactly alike. And that's one of those things. A lot of it, we're going to have a wide breadth of information available to us on the day, but a lot of it is also going to have to be left up to our interpretation for us on set on the day. We need to have the best practices available to us, but then we also have to make our interpretive decisions as things progress. And a lot of that will depend on the comfort level of the talent, the kind of stories we have to tell, the environments we find ourselves in, which a lot of those will change post-COVID. But when it gets right down to it, no two filmmaking situations are ever alike. So what we work to do is get ourselves to a place where we now know how to keep everything clean, that's safe for the gear, that's safe for the talent. And now we just have to figure out a way to put these things into practice in a real world situation with calm people there on the day, making sure that we just stay focused on the job we need to do. We stay focused on keeping everybody safe, and hopefully we will not be so ruled by the standard 12-hour day and
Right.
this huge page count that we've always had to get done. And that's the thing about filmmaking. For every miracle that you pull off, you're rewarded with another miracle to pull off.
Right.
Exactly.
You
Exactly.
do it now,
So-
why can't you do it again? So hopefully this
Right.
whole thing will help us step back a little bit. We'll see what's really important. We want to keep people safe. We want to get back to work.
Sure.
Um,
Last
but
week
that-
we did a show with Point Source, which is was titled Self-Miking. Is this going to be the new thing? And what it was all about is on an industrial show, particularly if you're doing a section of the show with the same talent over and over again, you basically train the talent to put their own mic on. Now in film, obviously you're working with the same people all the time. Does that ever happen that the talent just says, give me my mic, he puts it on, you go?
It's
Every
interesting
actor's-
you ask that. Yeah, I mean, we did a poll recently on the Facebook group for Lectrosonics about that subject, and that was where we got the contact with Brendan Beebe, because he mentioned that a couple of the actors he works with do have that. They own their own units, and they're used to putting it on or having someone in makeup help them and whatnot.
Right.
But the general consensus that we got was that would not work for a couple reasons. But I think it depends mostly on the actor, whether or not they're willing to take it on and take it seriously and learn the techniques. And many actors are not. They're not technical. They're not going to want to fool with it. So it really depends.
In film, there's a lot more care taken to hide the mic as
Yes.
opposed to industrial shows where they just clip it on. So
Right.
Well, even then, I had a job recently where the talent could clip on the mic, and right before they showed up to set, I had their gear prepped and cleaned and in individual bags. I powered through the plastic bag. I powered the units on. The AD ran them to their dressing rooms, and one of them went ahead and laved themselves. They just clipped it on, but the other one just brought the unopened bag right back to me and just said, "Yeah, just put it on,
put
just
this
put it
on
me."
me. Exactly. Yeah, right.
I was
That's
like,
what they
"Fine,
want.
fine." And as I saw him walking up, I with the bag in his hand, he's coming down the driveway. I just put my mask on. I did hand sanitizer so he could see me do it, and then we took care of it. It was not a big deal. And so that's and there's definitely with episodic TV, especially when you get into seasons 2, 3, and 4, when the actors are very established, they kind of wear the same things. We have a few actors. Hey, we have a few actors that will definitely, we just leave labs in their trailer. They lab themselves up. They'll come by and say hi to us in the morning. We'll give them a look-see and a listen test, and then let them go.
Yeah.
Chris, question for you. Did the actor put a mask on themselves before you wired them?
No, not at all.
So we did have a note from Mike Zimble and Jay Patterson. Great show, guys. Thank you very much. Kudos to Chris.
Excellent. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Peter,
fun.
thank you for your time.
Yeah,
Carl,
Peter,
good seeing
thank you.
Chris, good seeing
Sure.
you.
No, this
Guys.
has been very, very, it's great. I loved having all your different equipment and all those pictures of the equipment and how they get actually put on cars and stuff like that. That's really amazing. And
Really cool.
I think we could probably continue this forever.
It's a lot to talk about.
Exactly.
We love what we do. I mean, every setup we get into is different. The challenges are always there. The last thing you can do is, like my mentor told me, the last thing you can do is show up with an ideology, because that will always prove you wrong. And every setup is a new challenge, and with every take one is okay, great. Now we get to see how do we fix this? How do we make it better? And sometimes, I've said that to producers. They're like, why are we making an adjustment? And I'll have to tell them, look, we're just making a good thing better. That's it. Like, what we got is great, but we're gonna get now is better.
That's a good response, because what can they say to that? No, I don't want it better.
As long as you don't slow the boat down, you don't want to step in front of the train, but make your adjustments. We're here for it.
Well, terrific. Thank you very much. Thank you to all three of you. This has been really great. It's a terrific show, and I think we can probably do this again. We kept almost 100 of the attendees engrossed the entire time. We do have a show coming out later tonight, 8 p.m. Clearcom's going to do an in-depth thing on some of the more esoteric parts of their Eclipse intercom system. And on Wednesday, Solid State Logic is going to demo live a bunch of their consoles for us. So, and we have a lot of users out there using their consoles. So that'll be a great show. And then, of course, Friday we have Lectrosonics.
That's right. We'll be back with the D-Squared deep dive, talking about integration with Wireless Designer and some of the cool things inside the hardware and the software. So be fun.
That'll be a good show. Always back to digital is always good. Right? None of that analog stuff. Okay. Well, thank you very much. All have a good day.
Okay. Thanks, Peter.
Bye-bye. Yep.
See you.
Bye.
All right. Thanks again, Chris. See you soon, man.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Later.
Cheers.
All right. Cheers.